friends, welcome back to my channel, Learn Smart Coding. This is Karthik, thanks for joining with me today. In this course, I'm going to cover Web API development for beginners, and I have used .NET Core for this. Web API concept is what I'm going to cover throughout the course, but at the same time, I will explain you a little bit of or the important topics of the .NET Core application, and as well as we will see the repository pattern and 4-tier structured layers as we develop in the corporate. So we will develop such application, and also I'll explain you in deep of all the REST APIs, the HTTP, different HTTP verbs that is used in the REST. So this is the developed web API application. From scratch I'm gonna show you everything. So this is basically the APIs that is supporting for a shopping application. So if you see, this is the UI of the application which is using the web API that we are going to develop. So basically a shop, like if you own a shop, you wanted to show all the products and wanted to give some customer experience, this will be the starting point for you. So what are we going to cover in this? If you see, this is the hosted one, like this is the API that I've already developed and hosted. We will go through each API. So we're going to develop the categories, products, users, and wish list of the customers. So the main topics that are covered in this course is the .NET Core, the web API concepts, the entire structure layer of the project where you can write the code in a correct service layers and the repository layers. So we'll also use repository, we will use entity framework core, and we will use SQL database, and I'll also show you how to design a database, a simple database, how the relationship between the tables are, and also we will use the entity framework tool, CLI tool, to create a database using the tool. Okay, come without delay, let's get started. By the end of this course, you'll become a hero in this web API, and I will also cover major topics or few interview tips I will also give you throughout the course. So before we start into the project one by one, so I've also uploaded the whole project into the source code. Before we get into the step-by-step process, you can also know that this complete course coding has been already uploaded to the GitHub Learn Smart Coding user repository. So the repository name is essentialproduct.api, and I'll give you all this descriptions and the details of this URL in the description of this video. You can always go and check this. One thing I wanted to tell you guys is, like, when you download this either by the complete code or you clone it, all what you need to do is you need to set up your database. So what you have to do is go to the data project. Okay, under the data project, if you see, there's a DB script. Okay, and open up the script. So if you copy the script and just uncomment from here, and this, if you execute in your SQL server, it will create a database called Essential Product Demo. If you want to change the name of this, please go ahead and change it, but make sure you copy paste properly, replace the things properly, and then go back to this API project. And then what you need to do is, if you have changed any of this name of the database, you have to come to this settings and change the name of the one that you changed here as well. This is the connection string of your local database. Okay, and if you have anything on the server, you can always change this connection string to point to that. Let's say Karthik, I do not have SQL installed, I wanted to just start with that quickly. If in case you wanted to wish like that, right, all what you need to do is you just need to come to this API project, come to the startup class. Okay, and here instead of this line number 35, I will give another line. Okay, I'm going to give that line and comment it out. So what you do, comment this line and uncomment that line. So what it will do is, you don't need any database at all. You can directly start using this application, and that will use an in-memory database. Okay, alright, so enough story, let's get started. So first thing first, we need to install the softwares. I have installed Visual Studio 2022. If you have a different version, that's absolutely fine. You just need to make sure you have the .NET Core 3.1 installed. If not, don't worry, I'll give you everything in the description. So I'm going to create a new project. I have clicked on a new project, and here what you need to select is, you need to select for a template which is ASP.NET Core Web API. So once you select that, you can place it in your respective folders wherever you want it to keep. So I've named the project as learnsmartcoding.essentialproduct.api. So this is the first project that we are going to create, and here various versions are there. I have choose 3.1. Don't worry about 6 or 5. 5 is no more stable, only 6 is stable and 3.1 is stable. So that's the long term version. So I've saved it and I've created a project. See, the project has been created, and the template by default creates certain files. Okay, so the controller file, and you can see a program file, startup file, and so those files, right? So if you double click and see, there's only one package, which is .NET Core 3.1. So that's the target framework version, and that's the only file. And if you see the startup file on the program file, all the bare minimum codes are already present to boot the application. So this is the first line of code that executes the main line, and then it comes to the startup class, and there are two files, configure service and configure. Don't worry about all these things, I will explain you as and when we go. We are just going through what was there in the template, right? So this is the first one that will be invoked. See, there's a command already present, so you can read about it. So these two are the methods that gets invoked, and everything will be set up automatically. So let's take a look at and see how it looks. So if you opened up this, you can run it in two ways. One is the IIS Express, the other one will show you as the project name itself, and if you choose that, that's the Kestrel server. So it's a self-hosted server. So once you run this, see, it opens up to this localhost 44337, and then by default there was a controller created, and I could see some data as well, right? So how do these data are coming? So we're going to take a look at that. So if you open up the controller, so that's the controller, right? That's the name of the controller. So weather forecast is the name of the controller, and by default the get method, that's the one that gets triggered. So this controller was invoked and the get method was invoked. This piece of code, which is already written by the template, it's running and it's giving us the data. So if you see from where the port is coming, under this setting files, you can see two things. One is for the IIS version, the other one is the Kestrel. So you can see the launch URL is the controller name, which is already specified by the template. That's why when you just run the application by default, it opens up in this port and runs this controller. Okay, so this is the way how by default the template works. Now we will gonna take a look at how this Kestrel runs. So if you just change this Kestrel version, and this one, the one that I'm highlighting, right, that one will open up, and that could be in a different port. So I'm running it. Let's take a look. See, this is running at 5001 port, right? So you can run it in both the ways, so it's up to you. So next what we're going to do is we're going to install something called Swagger. So this will bring up a nice UI to test our controllers and the web APIs, all the endpoints, right? So I'm going to enlarge it so that it looks nice for you guys. So what you're going to do is right click on the project, go to the manage NuGet package. So this will open up the installed ones. Go to browser and you're going to type this one, Swagsbuckle, the this one for the ASP.NET Core. So once you see this, we're going to install a specific version. This version that I'm choosing is because of the .NET Framework 3.1. If you choose the latest version, it may not work, so try to stick to this version. The reason, because the latest version is for the latest framework. Okay, so we're gonna go with the equivalent version. So that package has been installed. Let's install another package called the Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core annotations. Okay, I'll explain you why all these packages are required. So let's choose the same version of the package 5.4.1. We're going to install it. It's installed. All right, so you can see all the installed versions under the installed tab, and under the browser you can see the browser one. So the one that we installed, these two versions, you see, if I double click on the project, you can see that in the item group. These two are the packages that we have specifically installed on this project. Okay, nothing else. Now what you need to do is, you don't need to memorize all these codes. So this specific code that I'm going to copy paste, right? So we're gonna copy paste the specific code from the Swashbuckle documentation, so don't worry about all those things. So what we're going to do is, under the configure servers method, we're going to configure this Swagger here. So just you need to type service.add swagger gen. So this add swagger gen method will come automatically because you have installed those two packages. And the one that I've copy pasted is basically shows the title, version, description of the open documentation, nothing else. So you can give your own specific details. You will see how it looks in the UI. So now this method has been added in the configure service, and you can see the swagger doc inbuilt options has been configured. So I'm going to give some basics things: email address, name, URL, how it looks on the documentation, right? Like version 1, version 2. Next thing that we need to do is you need to configure this swagger in the middleware. So anything that you do in the configure is called a middleware. Middleware is kind of like pipeline. So we have configured the middleware for the swagger, use swagger and the swagger UI, and this is the place where it will generate the XML. Okay, so it's gonna take out all the controllers and the methods that are inside the controllers, and it is going to show us nicely in the swagger. All what you need to do is come to the browser and change it to the swagger slash index.html. Now it is showing up very nice UI for us to test the controller on the API that was already built into the template. So the weather forecast is the controller and get is the method. So it has read all the inbuilt controllers in the method, and it is nicely showing us what is the URL, what is the response, possible response body, right? So what are we going to do now? Let's go to the launch setting and change the weather forecast launcher to the swagger. So now what this will do is it will directly launch our swagger now. So we have changed to both iOS and the local uh, casual settings. Now see, once I host it, it is directly going to the swagger, right? So now we have a nice swagger. So the next step is to delete the unwanted items from the template. So this file is not required, I'm deleting it. So this controller is also not required. We will do everything from scratch. And then let's go to the settings. Everything looks good. So we just have the app settings and then the program and the startup file. That's it, right? So we have cleaned up all the unwanted files that was created by default in the template. Alright, now let's create 3 more projects. So one is the API that we already have. The next one is that right click on the project, like right click on the solution, click on add new project. So this project is going to be the class library project. Okay, so go to that search box, type T library, and you will have some filtered items. So choose the class library of type .NET Core. I chose that. I'm gonna name it as core. Okay, so this project is going to end with the project name called core. Okay, so I'm going to keep this project in the same location and click on create, choose the same library location, and then you see the project got created. Okay, so this is also of type .NET Core 3.1 framework. Similarly, let's create another project, and this project we are going to name it as a data project. Okay, so data project is basically where all the backend related work will be done, like touching the database repositories, all those things will be done in this project. Okay, so this is done. One last project, and the process is same. Choose the library of type .NET Core class library, and in this we will name it as core. Okay, so core, I'm sorry, this we will name it as service. So this service project is basically a extra layer between our controller and the data layer. Okay, so we have core, data, service, and API. It's gonna call from API to service, service to data, and core is going to serve as the class objects. Okay, we will see one by one. The next thing is database design. So let's go to database. I'm going to show you the existing database. This is the existing database that was created for this project. I'm going to explain you these 5 tables: category table, product, image, and the product owner, and the wish list item tables. Okay, so how do you visualize this easily? Go to this query designer and choose all these tables that was already there. This is just for me to explain you guys. So I'm going to choose this 5 tables and show you the relationship between these tables. See, a category is a separate table. Okay, each product will have a category, and each product will have one or more product images. So that's why product image is separate table. Similarly, product owner is linked to a product. Okay, any product that you create will have a product owner, so which means product owner table also will have a data entry for a owner item. And wish list is basically will have n number of products for a given customer, and the product ID is the linkage. Okay, so you see this category is linked with product under the category ID, and similarly this product image will be linked to a product with a product ID. Wishlist item, same thing, will be linked with a product with a product ID, and product owner is basically uh, you know just the name of the owner and the object ID. So this owner object ID is to distinguish between each user. So when you guys see this and start doing accessing from one single place, each one will be considered as a different user. And when we integrate into Azure AD, you'll know why these tables are there. Okay, so now let's keep it simple. We have 5 tables, we have all the linkage described here. Okay, so I would like to explain you one more thing in respect to the database, though the database designs are not extremely covered in this API development. So think of this, there's a table, and so we will always have a primary column for a table, and the primary column here is the ID column. Okay, and which is generally of type big int, so that it grows, but primary column is nothing but the primary key, and there's something called foreign key. Foreign key is a column in another table which will map to a primary key of another table. So in this case, the category ID is the foreign key in product table, which is eventually a primary key in the category table. Now if you consider another example, the product ID, which is the primary key, will be a foreign key in product owner table and product image table. Okay, so that's defined in that way. And similarly, you see this product owner ID is a primary key which is defined as product owner ID in the product table. So that's the relationship between the tables, and the important key is called foreign key and a primary key. Okay, now having said this, you will understand in next few steps how we are providing a relationship between the tables. So now what we are going to do is we are going to go to the project and create the class object which will reflect exactly what is there in the database. Okay, so I have explained you those things in the database to tell you here how we write properties in the class will be translated into the tables and the relationship between the tables. Okay, so we are think of this, forget for this database for a moment. We are going to see how we are going to create these POCO classes right here, and then that class will eventually be translated into a new database. Okay, so the first class that we have is the category class. Any class that you define here is a table, so category is a table. So what we need to have in this table, we have a column called ID, which is of type short. Short will be translated into a small int. Okay, and then we have a name of type string. String will be translated into a varchar or an n-varchar, and then we have something called isActive. IsActive will be translated into a bit. Okay, because that's a boolean. Now we need to restrict a particular column with limited characters, right? So once you put required, a name property will become required here, and we can say minimum length and the maximum length. Okay, so the minimum length is 5, and then the maximum length is something that how many characters they can allowed to type. So let's put 500. Okay, so think of this, a 500, once we translate, it will become a column of size 500. Okay, so we will see that. And then a minimum is nothing but a restriction or a validation at the API side. Okay, now second thing is we have a class called product class. Okay, product is also going to translate into a table, product table. So to save some time, I'm going to copy paste the properties that I've already defined, and I will explain you. So it's exactly same. We have ID, name, description, price, all the column names defined here, and each column data type is also defined. Okay, And like I said, in the category, the data annotation that we put, max length, minimum length required, they all will be translated. Now the next class is the product image class. Okay, they're all same. So if you see this image, id, mine type, image name is active. Okay, these will translate into the columns. Okay, so we have three tables already defined here, and then the next one is we have wish list item and the what was the next one, the product owner. Okay, so let's create a product owner class, and this is also of type public class. So let's okay, so inside the product class again we have three columns. The id is the unique column that will get generated, and then owner ADO object ID and the owner name. Okay, so one thing you should remember, because we're going to use the entity framework needs a table with a unique uh, key of a column. Only then it will be able to track that particular record for updating. Okay, we will see all those things. The last table that we have is the wish list item. So it's exactly same. We have a couple of columns defined there, ID, name. Okay, so this intelligence will show you as and when you start typing C. If you just put a tab, everything will come, but we have a different name called owner radio object ID, so I've named it. So let's say we have all the five tables defined. Very good. Okay, the next step is to define the relationship between the tables. Okay, so if you see this, if I come to the product, I'm going to have a category ID and a virtual uh, you know once you define a property with a virtual and then named as category, so what will happen is this product table, right, will have a category ID as a column, and which will point automatically to the category table's ID. Category is a table ID, it will automatically map. That is that intelligent it is. Okay, so similarly we have more product image for a given product, right? That's why we have a virtual list of products for the product image. And similarly for the wish list item, um, we have to have a relationship between the product. So you see this, I pasted the product ID and the product. Okay, so we will have eventually the ID, product ID, and another column. Okay, so for the product owner we have all these things, and wishlist item also we have all these things. So the next thing that we are going to see is installing the packages that we need for our database related operations. Okay, so right click on the first project, the API project, go to the NuGet package, and you're going to install the Microsoft Entity Framework Core. So once you enter that and search, we are going to install a specific version of EF Core, because this EF Core that I'm installing is specific to our project. We cannot install 6 because 6 doesn't support for our 3.1. 6 is for the 6 project. Okay, and then the next package is the entity framework core.sql server. Because we're going to use the SQL server as a backend, we need to install this package as well. Okay, so I'm going to choose that package, select the right version. So go with the version that I'm going when you go through this coding. Okay, so let's install that. So we need to install a couple more tools. The next one that we will install is the entity framework core.tools. Okay, so you'll come to see why this tool is required. We're going to perform some operations to push the changes that we made on the model, right, to the database. So we need this tool. Another one is the code generation.design. So we need this tool also. And if you see all these tools that I'm installing, they're all of same version of the package. So if I go and click on this API project, you can see all the tools and their versions already loaded here in the item group. So these are the tools that we are going to use, and these are the packages that we installed. Okay, now what we are going to do is right click on the dependency on the API project, and here the two projects that we will use is the data project and the service project. Okay, so we need the data project to touch our backend server related configuration, and service is something that we will need to touch the methods through the service, like I said initially, right? So similarly I am going to other projects and adding the dependency. So for the data, uh, the core project is required because that's where our all the Poker classes are sitting. Similarly, come to the services. From services, we are going to touch the database, right? So which is the data project. So I added the dependency for the service project also. Now all set. If I click on the data, you can see what are the packages installed on the data. These are the things that is required. Alright, so let's delete unwanted stuff, and let's create a new class under the data project. So this class is for our entity framework core DB thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class called essential product DbContext. Okay, for all the EF operations, DbContext is the base class. Okay, so we have to inherit the DbContext. So I'm inheriting the DbContext of um, so I'm inheriting the DbContext, and we have inherited this, and then let's put a constructor. The short form to generate the constructor code is CTOR, and then if you do a tab, it will come your constructor basic coding will come. See here, what we are going to do is we are going to inject the DbContext options. Okay, so if you look at this, the first one inside the parameter is the essential product DbContext class name itself. So the DbContext options of type this class, and we will name it as options. Okay, and then we will pass in those options that we are receiving from the configuration to the DbContext base class. See, the DbContext class has a constructor which accepts these options. Okay, so we are going to pass this to the base class as well. That's what colon base option means. Now we have the constructor. What we have to do is we have to now configure the tables here. Okay, so each table is db set of a particular type, and in our case we have 5 tables, if you remember: the category table, product table, and then product image, and so on, right? So the first one that I'm going to define here is the category table. So db set of category, and we will name this table name as category. Similarly, I'm going to copy paste and then change the all the table names. The second one is the product, so we will name the uh, we will name it as product. Then the third one, we have it as product image, so let's name that property as product image. See, all these things that you're seeing here of type db set, they represent individual tables. Okay, so remember, I'll repeat, you have a DbContext inherited for our base class. Okay, we're passing that options, and then here we are defining our tables. We have defined 5 tables. Okay, just a getter and setter property, that's it. This configuration is fair enough, we are good here. So we have done all the basic configuration. Now let's add up the configuration, I mean to say the db connection string. So come to the app settings.development.json. See, app development.json is a particular file which is pointing to our development environment. In a real time, when you put this to a different environment, you will have different files for each environment, like QA, staging, production, all these things. Okay, now when we build all these particular environment, and the app setting.json content will be merged. Okay, so because this is just a learning phase, I'm going to assign my DbContext connection string into the app settings.json itself, which means it's a common one. But in a real time, you will have different connection string for different environment. All right, that's good enough. We have the configuration settings in the app settings.json. Now come to this configure services method inside the startup class. Here, as I said, we are going to configure all the services. In this case, we are going to configure our SQL database. So because we have installed all those entity framework correlated packages, when I say services dot add db context pool, that will automatically come. Okay, db context and db context pool, there's a difference. I'll explain you a little later, but this is going to reuse the connection. That's why add db context pool is the preferred one from the Microsoft. Now here you pass in the class that we defined. The class we defined was essential products db context, so we have defined that class to this configuration. And options, there are two things: option dot use SQL thing, and then another one called in memory. In memory is something that we will not use for our real-time demo. You don't need database itself, it's going to do everything in memory. Okay, we will have a separate video for that. It's a very short and crispy one. So let's use the use SQL server configuration. And here if you see, I'm passing the connection string. I'm getting the connection string from the app settings.json. So how do you get that? You can use configuration dot get connection string and then pass in the connection string name. In our case it is DbContext. Okay, configuration is the property which is defined on line number 26 that will read all the configuration automatically. That's the beauty of .NET Core. Okay, so we have defined everything here. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the entity framework CLI tool to push all the the tables that we created in the model. So I'm going to the database data project and open that in the command prompt. Okay, so you can see that location. I'm gonna expand that so it's visible. So here what we're going to do is we're going to type entity framework later stuff. So .NET EF, that's the command that you need to type. And if you have not installed EF, don't worry, I'll give you a video description. You can go and check how to install and keep it ready. So in my case, I have already installed a tool 5.0.11. So the tool is there. The three commands that is important: database migration, and DbContext. So we will use whatever is required for our course. Okay, so first thing that we're going to use is the .NET EF migration, and then the next command is the add. Give a name, which is initial create is the name that I'm going to give. Okay, so .NET EF migrations add followed by the name of the migration, and then I'm also specifying dash s. Dash s means it's a source of the startup class. So in our case, the startup class is sitting inside the API project. So I'm saying, hey, go and look for this API project, a CS project, which is in this location. Okay, so that is what I'm going to type here. That's it. That's the simplest command that you have. And what this will do is this will build the project. Okay, it will go to the data layer, it will do all the connection configurations, and it will read those 5 tables that we have configured, the classes, right? So it will do all checkings and generate a migration class. Migration class will eventually have all the configuration that these 5 tables are having. So how the relationship, everything will be generated automatically by this tool. Okay, so it's generated. Now let's go back to the project and see what has been generated. You see this, there's a folder called migration under the data project, and you can see there's a date created and then a class name. So here you can see all the constraints, the name, the length of the property, what property type, everything is configured here. Okay, so based on this migration class, whatever data is there inside this migration class, we're going to use another command called .NET EF database update followed by the project name. Okay, what this will do is it will go take this particular migration. If there are more than one migration, it will always take all the migration one by one. Now it will try to push this changes to our new database connection that we have configured. If you see, I'm going to refresh the new database name that I gave in the configuration, right? App settings.config JSON. That that database name it will take, and it will generate these scripts and execute directly onto the database. And that's why you can see the demo database and then the original one that I showed you in the initial video. Okay, and this EF migration history will tell you how many times we have migration. Say this is the starting point. Let's say you need to add more features on top of this. You can keep adding the classes, all the properties, and repeat the same step. It will generate all the classes migration, and you can push this to the database. Okay, here comes the core concept. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through a little slower than usual, and I'm going to explain you in deep of basic things that you need to know about the web API. Okay, if you understand the next 10-15 minutes of this core concept, I can assure you you will be able to answer most of the interview questions, and you'll be very clear on what you're implementing, and your life will be going to be very good and easy. Okay, so come, let's get started. So the core concept, like I said, right? So okay, so let's talk about some core concept of web API. So API stands for application programming interface. Okay, if you look back, before the web API, we used to develop the web services, which is based out of the SOAP protocol. And then something came from Microsoft called WCF, right? If you're from Microsoft background, and then it evolved, and then now it's all web API, right? Everything is web API. So the major difference between the previous and the current one is the protocol. Web API actually uses a protocol called HTTP protocol. Okay, so HTTP protocol can be executed from so many places. It could be executed directly on the browser, it could be from your mobile device, right? You have using any apps, it's talking to the backend API through uh, the HTTP protocol. And what else? If you consider the current world, right, there are a lot of small chips. Consider anything. It could be a Google Chrome, uh, you know, the Amazon Alexa. Take any small devices, any devices, right? It can actually talk to a backend API, and that is all possible from the API. Now, and also this works with a disconnected architecture. Okay, so it's disconnected stuff, right? The client and the server are not connected at all. So the server will not have any information about the client. It won't remember anything. There is no sessions or anything. Okay, if a request is received by the server, if everything is correct in the request, it will simply execute the request and returns a response. It doesn't care who is calling. As long as the request is valid, it can give a response back. Okay, let's keep it simple. Now, when we talk about web API, right, what are the different HTTP methods, or we can also call it as HTTP methods, or we also call HTTP verbs. Okay, what are those things that is available? So there are five important things that are frequently or mostly used, and you should know all those five. Okay, so first one is HTTP GET, and then the second one is HTTP POST, HTTP PUT, HTTP, what is the fourth one, delete, and then there's something called HTTP patch, PATCH patch. Okay, these are the five things we will see in our course, and a most commonly used one. So let's step back, let's understand some basics before we get into the coding. Okay, they're very important. Now, in simple English, okay, so a request is fired, it goes to the server, okay, and then a response is sent back. So let's understand this. So request is fired, okay, and then a response is sent, right? A response is sent. That's it. Request, a response. Now let's split down this, okay, for our understanding. Request, what a request has. What do we have it in the request? We have few important things. The first one is HTTP headers, okay, then HTTP body, or let's put it in simple words, it's just a request body, request body, okay, and then request is sent in the URL. Okay, so these are the terms. Now let's understand few more things. What is inside the headers? Inside the HTTP request header, it's a key value pair. It's a key value pair, okay, that's it. It could be many key value pairs you can send. Okay, so for now just understand headers are nothing but a key value pair. So let's take an example. So let's one simple example. Okay, what is that can be available in the header? So the one common thing that we will send is the authorization header. So this is the header key name, and then this So authorization is the header key name, and this will have some bearer token. Okay, there's a token, or I would say a key, a valid key. We will not talk about all these things here, but just for your understanding. Okay, we will cover this in a future course where you will understand how authentication is built and used. Okay, and you can also send custom headers. You can say I can send a company ID, and then that can have a particular value called like this, right? Some numbers or some name. It is all custom headers. Okay, so these headers are read from the headers in the request, and then something is determined in the server side. Okay, so let's keep it simple. Now body, request body. Request body is nothing but the content that we send to the server to process. Okay, so let's say you're searching a job, or let's say you're going to any site where you fill in some information. When you fill in some information, you have a key value pair or a bunch of information, right? You will pass name, age, date of birth, address, blah blah, so many things. Now each data that you send, right, each data that you type, they're all inside the request body. So this will be a pure JSON content that we will send. Okay, so a request body will have a JSON content. So request body is a key value pair, right? It is a JSON content which will have many information. So let's keep it simple. Let's say this JSON body is having a property called name, and then and the value is Karthik. Okay, so this is what a request body will have, and this is obvious, it's a URL. Okay, let's understand a little more. So URL, how do we have an URL? So we use an HTTP protocol, and if we can use a secure protocol, that's called HTTPS. Okay, S stands for secured. So this is SSL layer. So this is the first part, protocol name, followed by the domain name. Domain name is the website name in simple words. So let's keep it simple. So learnsmartcoding.com is the real website. Okay, so it's a real website, and that's the domain name. Okay, so let's correct this, it's a backslash. Okay, so domain name, and then followed by, so in API how do we do this is we will prefix a word called API followed by a version of the API. In our course we are going to keep this simple, so it's just only one version. Okay, so when you get into a very big project, there will be different versions of the same API will be sent, so that anyone who's using previous API will not be disturbed. Okay, so let's keep it simple. Let's add just a word called API followed by the controller name, action name. Okay, so all these things are parameters. So these are something that we will explain you. So, and then there's something called ID. That's it. Or so this is the structure of the URL. Okay, so when you see further details in our course, you will see how the controller name is coming, how an action name is binded, what is ID stands for, or all these things. Now there are a few more things that you should understand. Okay, a GET request will never ever have a body. A GET and a delete will not have body. Only put, patch, post will have body. Okay, so let's type this. No body for this, it's only URL. Only URL. Okay, similarly no body for this request. Okay, now I think you are clear with the request. Okay, now let's drag in. Once this is received and we process this, response will have similar structure. So response is going to have, what response will have, it will have headers, that's called response header, and then response body. Okay, all right. So response body will eventually have the processed data, and then headers will have information that the API will tell the browser or anyone who's client receiving it, right, to do and what to do, what not to do. So security related information will be there in the response header. So far we are clear. Now let's take a look at the real example. Okay, so this is the API that we are going to build, right? So let's understand some few basics things like what we discussed in the notepad. Okay, and then I will get into the code and I'll help you out build each and every single API line by line. Okay, so if you see this, this is the controller name and these are the actions. Each are the action methods. Okay, so let's click on this one single thing. Let's click on try it out and we will see how the URL is formatted. I executed it, and don't worry about all these things, just take a look at this URL. Okay, so in this case, this is our domain name. This is hosted in this domain, so our API will have HTTPS, that's the protocol, followed by the domain name. You can see this, and then API is something that is prefixed, followed by the controller name. Okay, in our case is category, and then in web API the actions are automatically built based on the verbs that you're using, so we will get to that. Okay, and then the ID that we passed was 2, so 2 has come here, and then it executed something and it gave us result. Okay, similarly all these things. So okay, so we have seen some good theory here. We know most of the concept now. We understand some basics of what is request, what is response, what is protocols, all those things we have understood. Now let's get into the basic coding. Before we get into the coding, one more thing that you need to understand is we have 4 projects. Okay, so we have API project, we have a core project, service, we have API, core, service, and then we have data project. Okay, so how is our flow going to work? So our API project is the starting point. So starting point is our API project. Okay, this will talk to service project. Service project will in turn talk to data project. Okay, and then the result will be returned. Core project, as I said, they are just a common database related content or the properties files, Poco classes. They are referenced against all these 3 projects. Okay, so the first thing that we will see is how to connect your database using the DbContext directly into this API project and see how data are retrieved. But that is not our goal of this course. The goal of our course is to build a superb web API project in a nicer way where the companies, the corporate companies where we will build, right? So similar to that. And then I'll tell you how the separation of concerns are coming into picture and how are we going to separate each code into different layers and then connect the dots to get our result. Okay, that is what we're going to do. Come, let's get into the coding. So let's create the first controller. That's what we're going to do. So right click on the controllers folder on the API project and click on new controller. Okay, so I'm going to name this as just the category controller. Okay, so we have named it, and you can see by default there was a template got created. So there's a get of 2 types, a string, an ID. You see this put, patch, post, delete. All these things are created by the template so that it's easy to get started with. And you saw that route, it was prefixed with a word called API followed by the controller. The controller is nothing but this one, the category, line number 10, the one that I'm highlighting, that's called controller. Okay, that's the controller name. Now we have all these methods, right? So the get method is returning a string and it is accepting ID as the input, and then similarly all these things. So what we are going to do is now we're going to change from a primitive type, string is a primitive type, we're going to change that into the action result. Action result is a class of different types. So when you put action result, a particular method can return various types of results. Okay, Now what we are going to do is we are going to use the DbContext directly onto our controller and see how to access the DB and get the result. Okay, this is just a demo to start with. We're not going to do the same thing for the rest of the controllers. We will implement a proper way of doing it, the layered way of doing it. Okay, so I injected the class. You see this essential product DbContext. So once it is injected in the constructor, you will have the instance of the DbContext. Now what we are going to do is in the get, so we access that variable DbContext dot directly category. So once you say dot, it will give you all the table names, and find is a method. Okay, so this is all inbuilt DB EF core methods. So find is a synchronous method, and we are passing an ID is a number, integer. Okay, and what it will return is if it has a ID which is of type primary column, right? So once it finds an ID of that particular number, it will return the category. If it is not, it is going to return a null. So what we are going to do is line number 34, if there is nothing returned, we will send a status called 404, and that's called not found. Okay, if not, we will send a status called OK, which is of 200 type. Okay, that's a HTTP status code, and I'll explain you different status code in just in a minute. And then let's go and correct the second one, get. So this is a get. When you access directly the controller API method name, it is going to hit this one. Okay, so what we are going to do here, no filtering, directly dbcontext.category.get list or to list. So it will return every content of this category table, and we are directly returning 200 OK. Okay, if you say OK, and then inside that if you pass in a model or an object, it will automatically deserialize into JSON. That is the beauty. Now post, right? The third one that we are going to do is post, but let's take a look at all the different things. See, I got all the 5 category related stuff. So the category has 5 different methods, right? So all those we got. And if I try to execute the first one, it's an array of category. And if I try to execute a particular ID, if I pass in a number and try to execute, see, it's connecting, it is talking to the database. For the first time it takes a few seconds. Looks like we got an error. All right, so the key value at the position 0, so it's basically not having the ID. So let's debug and see. So I'm going to edit this. Let's see what is going on. Okay, short, you see this number 31, that's of type short. Okay, so let's run this and let's hit and see what happens. So let's go to this get. I'm going to type number 1. So 1 is something that you're supposed to receive. Okay, we'll find out where we're receiving it or not. Okay, looks it's working now. So 1 was received and there was no data as such, so it returned a 404. Okay, similarly post, put, all these things is going to work. Okay, let's stop the project. Let's go to the post. Okay, post is basically like we're sending some information to the server and server is processing it. So how do we save a record? Post is nothing but saving a record into the database. So let's create a category variable. Okay, and then pass in the value that we are receiving, and by default we will set is active flag as true. Okay, so that's what we set. And see, .NET Core sometimes give us a handy code. So dbcontext.category.add. So in entity framework, what we will do is, in order to add an item into the table, we use that table name.add and pass in that object, and then you just need to call dbcontext.save changes. That's it. The record will be executed and inserted. And what are we going to return? We are going to return a created result of so a created result is going to return 201 status code. Okay, so when this code executes, it is going to return a 201 status code, and also it will tell uh, the browser that okay, this is what the result is and this is the ID that was created. Okay, so we have returned a post, and then put is similar. Put and post, the only difference is post is to create the whole entity, put is to update more than one property of an entity. Okay, so if you have to update a name, or if you have to update many properties, we will use put. Okay, and put will correspond to a particular ID. That's why you can see in 54 it is pointing to an ID and with a put. And you should also notice line number 55, it receives the data, the string value, right, from the body. Put will always have something on the body. In 45 line number, string is received in the body. Okay, so put, patch and post will have body, rest will not have body. So here what we are going to do, we are trying to find the category, line number 57, send in that number and find that category instance. So that will hold a reference to a particular category. Once you have that, we are modifying the name into the new value, and then we say dbContext.update, pass in that object. It will automatically start tracking. As soon as you put it into the update, it will start tracking that record. Okay, and once you do a save changes, it will execute and update the SQL statement. Okay, and as it's like, if you don't pass a particular number which is not exist, we are going to find and return a 404 not found. So let's execute the post. Let's try it out. String. So here you need to pass in a string. So we will give a name called rings and execute it. It's executing. Let's wait for a few seconds. Great. See, it executed and returned a status code called 201. Okay, for get it will return a status code called 200. For post it is 201 by default. I would say it's a preferred status that we have to send. Okay, so here we receive the data, and we will execute a few more items in the category. So milk and dairy. So if I execute, see, now it's number 2, the 2 items created. Okay, so let's retrieve second one. See, we got the second one. Great, and that's the status code. So let's copy this. If you try to put the 3, see, there's no item 3. That's why 404. If you try to execute 1 or 2, you will receive a data. Okay, great. Now let's go to the put, and we know we have data for 1 and 2. Okay, so we're going to put 1, copy paste that the content. Okay, so here what we are going to do is, for the 1 we are trying to change the data. We will change 1 into soft rings instead of rings. So this will find out that number and it will try to execute, but there is some error. Again, we did not receive the ID properly, and we need to change this ID into short. Okay, because the table that we have configured is a small int, that's why it is short. So now if you try to execute the drinks into the soft drinks, that is what we are trying to update. So once you do that and pass in a different data, it is executing. Let's wait for a few seconds. All right, see, it found the value, it updated the value, and let's go and find whether it updated or not. So I'm going to pass in number 1. It will change from drinks to soft drinks. Okay, all right, great. See, it has changed from drinks to soft drinks. And so it's all. Now if you try to execute get, it will return 1 and 2 values. Delete. So delete, we're going to implement delete here. Let's go to our API. So here delete will not return anything. Okay, it will just accept the request and execute it. So let's change the signature into action result. So it's the same concept. We'll copy and see whether that items are available in the database. If it is not, we will return a 404 status code that's not found. And then if we find a value, okay, we need to use a delete statement. So dbContext dot remove is the equivalent of delete, and then pass in that object. See, that object will have a category ID, right? So it will know which one to delete. It will eventually generate a script to delete a particular row from the table. So that's it. Once you make a dbContext.save changes, and then it's going to execute it, and we will just return a OK statement. OK will correspond to a 200 status code. Okay, so let's create a dummy category which we will delete it. So I've come to the post method and creating a category named delete this, okay, because I really want to delete this. So let's execute this. This, this will become an ID of 3 because this is the third item that we are inserting. Okay, all right. So third item we got ID 3. Let's put 3 here, okay, and then execute it. Again, it's the same problem. We have everything as int. Okay, so we need to correct this to short. So once you rerun this and go to the delete, put 4, which does not exist. So you should ideally see a 404. Okay, see, it's 404, which is correct. Now let's put 3 and execute 200. It got deleted. If you come to categories and try it out, you'll see only 1 and 2. See, it's an array of 1 and 2. Okay, all right. So we saw how to access the database directly from the API project, but this is not the preferred way of doing. Let's get into the separation of concerns. Okay, we will see one by one how to do that in a proper layer. Now before that, I wanted to introduce asynchronous process. So there are, in entity framework core, you have synchronous and asynchronous method. Okay, so for asynchronous method, it will end with async keyword. See, I changed find to find async. The moment you change, what will happen is it will return a task of object. Okay, so the simple thing that you need to do to accommodate your asynchronous code is add a signature called async, and then instead of a action result, return task of action result. And wherever you will write async method, you have to put an await keyword. Okay, so that's the async await keyword. So I will explain you after this piece of code. I'll explain you what is async await. That's also one of the important interview questions, and good to know if you have never used asynchronous programming. So most of the synchronous methods will have asynchronous equivalent method. Okay, so we're changing all the synchronous method to asynchronous method, and all what you need to do is you need to put an await keyword in front of it, an async keyword in the signature of the method, and change action result to task of action result. Okay, so if you are not aware of this asynchronous programming, let me know in the comment section. Probably I'll try to put a short simplest video for you to understand how to use async await. Okay, all right. So we changed all these things. We don't need any synchronous methods. We have updated everything to asynchronous method. Let's put await, and let's change this. All right, so all the errors went off. Okay, great. So we will shortly see why async await is important to use, and let's try it out. Nothing has broken. Okay, so it's all executing. Let's take a look. All right, it's all executing, which is good. So from now we are going to see the actual and the right way of implementing. So the next controller that we will implement is the product controller. Okay, so in this product controller we will have different get, put, post, everything here. So let's create the controller. Now if you see, the controller has been created and it has the default code which has generated by the template. Will have get, put, post, everything, but we're going to modify one by one. Okay, so this is the product controller, and you can see all these things are there: delete, put, post, everything. So now go to the data layer and let's create our first repository. So I'm going to create a repository. Right click on the project, create a repository with an interface. So I am going to name this as iProduct repository. Okay, that's an interface. So interface is what will basically will have the definition of the method, and we are going to implement that method in the implementing class. Okay, so this will have just the signature of the method. So what we are going to do is, in the product controller, we are going to first implement the get HTTP methods. So for that, we are going to have a method called get product. Will accept the product ID as the input and will return a product. It's just a single product. Okay, and there will be another method which will be list of products. Okay, so in this case there could be many products, right? So we will give some numbers, and we'll ask to return only certain number of products, and that will be a list of product. Now we already saw in our clip about the async await operation, so we are going to implement these exactly same methods but in asynchronous calls. Okay, so this will have task of product get product async and task of list of product get products async. These two methods are identical to the previous one, it's just the synchronous and asynchronous. Okay, so that you will know how easy it is to implement both the way. So I'm going to create a class, a public class of product repository and implement iProduct repository. So if you press control period, it will give you option to refactor it. So that's how I created all these templates. You saw that happening. And here we will inject the DbContext. Okay, so earlier we were seeing how to inject the DbContext in the controller, which is not the right way of doing it. So we will inject the DbContext here, the essential product DbContext in the repository. So repository is the layer where it will interact with the database thing. Okay, and no other place there will be interaction to the database, which is the DbContext. Okay, so what we are going to do, we are going to write all the logics related to the database operation in this repository, which will be pointing only to the product related stuff. Okay, so similarly when we go through further, we will implement different repositories for different needs. Okay, so here you can see we are going to implement all the four methods, and whatever you're seeing is exactly what you saw in one of the the previous controller. So we are using dbcontext.product.find. Find is inbuilt method. Will you pass in the primary id, which is the product id, and it will return the product. If it doesn't have anything, it will return a null. Similarly, if you see what I'm typing is, basically we are ordering the products descending order by the created date. So latest product which was created will come as first. Once we order it, we are using an inbuilt method called take. With these inbuilt methods that you're seeing is all link you. So what this take method will do is it will accept a number and then it is going to retrieve only those numbers. So if you have to translate in SQL, you can say top 10, top 20. That is what this SQL will be translated. Okay, so we have used two methods, order by descending and take. They are all inbuilt extension method for the product type. All right, so what else is missed? So we need to now just implement this get product async. So instead of find, we will be using find async. Rest is all same. One thing you should remember, what you need to know is whenever you need to wait for the data, only there you need to use async await. Okay, if you're not requiring any data immediately, you can still return a task of that item from the method that you're implementing. See, in this place I am not going to do anything with the data that I'm retrieving here, so I will not use async await here. This method will still return a task of product. However, you will see now when we use the service layer, we will implement the async await over there because we might need to have the data over there. Okay, now go to the service layer and implement similar interfaces and the method exactly to touch, in other words, to call the methods in the data layer. So there we had a repository name, so here we will name it as iProduct service. Okay, so iProduct service is the layer where you will eventually call database and then do some more business logic. In a real time, you will call data layer. Once you return the data in the service layer, you will do some more extra work. But our project is small and simple, so we may or may not do more business logic in the service layer, but I'm just telling you, in a real time, service layer is the place where we will implement the business logic. Let's create a implementation class called product service, and you're going to implement the iProduct service. Okay, so here what will happen in the constructor, you need to inject a service which is iProduct repository. Okay, so in the iProduct repository, in product repository, you injected DbContext. Here you're injecting the repository. Okay, so for our product service class, we just need iProduct repository, so we have injected that, and it is simple. With that instance, you can simply call the methods that was already implemented. So here if you see, we are not writing any more further logic. It is fairly simple. So we will directly say product repository dot get product and product repository dot get product async. All the methods are all same. Okay, and we will also pass in whatever the parameter we have. Okay, so let's finish this up. Okay, one last thing that we need to correct. So we need to pass the number of products. Okay, all set. So we have our iProduct service ready, iProduct repository ready, right? All the 4 methods are ready. Now these methods can be used from your API project. What we are going to do is we just give 100 as the default number of products. So if the caller is not sending how many products they want, by default we fall back to 100. Okay, so now in the controller it is the chain reaction, right? So here you will inject iProduct service. See, as I said, API project is touching the service project will instance the data layer. So the API project will inject always the service, will not touch any repository. Okay, you should remember this pattern. That's how a proper architecture flow that you will have to follow. So we now know to retrieve the data for the product. So if you look at the day, so now if you look at the first method, which is get method, so this get method, right, so we are going to call the product service dot get products, and then we will pass in the 100. So if the caller is not sending, we will just pass in, hey, I need 100 products, get me 100 products. Okay, and that is what the default parameter is. So here we have already set the default parameter as 100, so we don't need to do anything here. And then once you retrieve it, right, the return type of the get method is okay will return a 200 status code. Okay, we already discussed this. So we are retrieving data and we are sending it back. Now what is the last piece that we need to do? So we need to tell the .NET Core that okay, I have these services and these implementation, and I'm trying to configure it. So if you come to the configure service, okay, service.add scoped, and then you're passing the interface and the respective implementation class. Once you define these configuration here, only then your dependency injection that you used in all the constructor will work. Okay, there are 3 types: add scoped, add transient, and add singleton. This is one of the interview questions. Okay, so add scoped is basically every single request a different instance will be provided by the injecting class. Add transient is per every single time that you are trying to inject in your constructor, every single time you will get a new instance. Okay, and add singleton is throughout the application only one instance. Add singleton is not safe. Okay, and add transient is also not required unless we don't do any database related operations. So add scoped is the best one that we will use. Every HTTP call, a new instance will be given. All right, now you see there is no product, right? That's why we saw only 200 with the empty array, but our flow did work. It was trying to get the data, there was no data as such, and that's why we got the empty array. Now let's convert this into our asynchronous method. So we are going to make it as asynchronous. So put an async await keyword, and we are changing our synchronous code to an asynchronous method call. So that's why, if you remember, I was writing both synchronous and asynchronous method. Okay, so I would always advise you to go with asynchronous calls, which is good and good to practice when you're doing itself. It's very simple. I will give you a separate link specific to async await usage. If you're not aware of how to use, you can go through that and come back and take a look at how we are implementing here. It's really simple. So the next one is the get product by ID. What we are doing here is exactly same. We are going to call that specific method and pass that ID that we are retrieving from the route. If you look at line number 30, HTTP get, this is an HTTP get method, and then in the curly bracket if I say ID, okay, the get URL will be formed accordingly. So you will pass in a number which will come and sit in the ID property. Okay, you should also remember the ID, the word that I'm using, the spelling, right? It should be exactly same, ID matching with line number 31 ID. Only then the automatically the data that you're passing will get mapped to this ID. If you put a different word, you will not get that number here. Okay, so those are the basic things which sometimes you will forget. We will write our own name it and it just goes off. Okay, so what we're doing, so we are trying to get that product, and if it has, we will return with a OK statement, and the product will be given automatically as a JSON format. And if it is null, meaning you're sending a number, meaning you're sending, let's say, 101, and 101 product is not there, so we will return a not found, which is 404 status code. Okay, so next is to get our CRUD rest of the operations succeed, right? So we have a delete, update and post which are pending. So we are going to create the methods that will support all these three actions. Okay, so let's go to the product service and write certain methods. The first method that we will write is the create product async. Okay, now you can see most of my upcoming methods will only have synchronous methods. Okay, so the first one that we want was the create product, the second one was the update. So what both the method will do is they'll accept the input as product, and from there we will either create or we will update it. Okay, and then the last one is to delete it. Delete, we just need the product ID. Okay, so the input is the product ID and we will delete the entity from the table. Okay, so we have the methods that we have created, and let's come to the product service and implement those things. So all right, so what we have to do is we created these three methods and then we're trying to implement it, but we just forgot that we don't have those things in the data layer. So I'm going to this iProduct repository and going to the interface. So it's exactly same, right? So we're going to create three methods which will do the create, update and delete. So in create, what we will do, we will say dbcontext.product.add. See, in entity framework, if you have to add an item to a table, so you will use the table name dot add, pass in that entity. Okay, so in our case it is product. Then we will say dbcontext.save changes async, and because it is async, what it will do, it is an asynchronous operation. So here what we are doing is, like I said, in this case we have waiting for the operation to finish. So that's why we are including async and await keyword in that operation. Okay, so here we add it, we save it, and then we return the product that was created. So in entity framework, the beauty is the product that you are using, right? Initially the ID will be 0, but once you execute and return that product, the ID will be automatically updated with the ID that was created by the entity framework, meaning in the backend. Okay, now for the update, it is same. We will pass in that entity into the product.update. Here what will happen is when you put some entity into the update statement, okay, the ID which is expected to be there in that product entity, and then that will start tracking the changes for that ID. And then we will do the same save async and saved. And for the removal of the product, which is you use dbcontext.product dot, so dot remove, that is what we will use. So dot remove, and then you have to pass in the particular ID. See here what will happen is, right, so you need to pass an ID, or you need to pass the entity which is of that particular product. So in our case, if you see, the product ID is nothing but the ID that is owned by a particular product. So we first retrieve the product. Okay, so dbcontext.product.find async and then pass in the product ID, and what will happen, this will return a particular product. Okay, so we'll put async await. Now in this, what will happen is once it returns the data, it will start tracking. Now you pass in that product to remove entity into the remove. Okay, so now it knows which entity has to be removed from the product, and rest is all same. So then you use dbcontext or save async changes, and which will eventually delete that particular record from the database. Okay, now here what we are doing is we are just returning a task of boolean, right? So if anything that is returned from save async, if the number of affected records are more than 0, means something is deleted, right? That particular number of items has been deleted. If it returns 0, which means it has not deleted anything. That is what it means. Okay, now we will implement the create product, right? So create product we have already implemented in the repository, so we are just calling that from the service layer. Similarly, for the update and delete, we will also call the respective methods from the data layer and pass in the required parameters. Okay, so once you set up all these things, our service layer, our product service layer is ready, which will support get, put, post, delete, and then 2 different gets. Alright, so similarly the update also I'm doing it, so fairly easy, right? So in our service layer, we do not have any business logic layer, but in real time, there will be some business logic layer that you will perform. Ours is a simple app, so keep this in mind. Okay, it's not just a layer to have handover and takeover. It's something that we do some work in the business logic sides. Okay, all right. So now what we are going to do is we are going to create a folder called view model in the API project, and then we will also have different folders for four different operation: get, create, and update and delete. Okay, so in get, what we are going to do is we are not going to return exactly what we already have it in our product table. Okay, see, product table might have 10 columns or 20 columns. We should not expose all the 20 columns or whatever columns that we have. We don't need to expose to the caller. Okay, instead, this is where the view model comes into picture. View model is a translated copy of your original entity. So in our case, I have several columns. I'm going to give them back only the ID, name, description, price, availability, and then action and category ID. We will not return anything else like last modified date, created date. We don't need to return all those things. Okay, so whatever is there, we have done it, and you see the line number 9, 10, all those things are data annotation, which will instruct the the .NET Core to validate the properties that you will eventually see when we do a create. So let's write a create product. So create product is another class which is inheriting the product view model, and that we will put it in line number 42. So the input that we expect in the body is of type create product. Okay, so the inheritance comes into picture. So whatever properties that you have it in the view model will be automatically given to the create product. That's how you reuse the code and do not do repeated codes here and there. Okay, so we are keeping it simple and in a common place. Now if you look at this, what we are going to do is for post operation. Okay, so we will translate our view model into the product category class. Like for example, product is a class from the core project. Okay, that is what is translated into table, right? It's not our view model. So we are going to create a new instance of a product class and then assign all those properties values from the incoming data in the body. You can do it in a different way also, like you can use automapper to automatically map the properties, but to explain you how this is working, I'm manually mapping the input, the incoming data with the required product data. So you can see all the properties that I'm mapping: name, available, since, its category ID, description, all those things I'm linking. Okay, now once you have these things ready, the entity to add, which is of type product, remember the product is coming from the core project. Okay, that is what the table is, right? That's how we created the table and updated the database, right? So that is the entity that we need to pass in. Now once you have that, we will say we are going to give this object to the caller, like the next method. Now if you see the relationship, right, the product table has a product owner also, because at this point of time we have not integrated with anything with the authentication. What I'm going to do is I'm simply passing object with ID called admin. So if you try to create a product, by default it will treat as created by an admin. Okay, later in the upcoming videos, when we go to the authentication stuff, we will change this admin to a real-time username. Okay, so down the line when you see my video or updated content, you will see when you do, your name will come. When I do, my unique thing will come. So every subscriber could go and visit my website. When they try to create the product, only it will be treated as they created. When they try to edit, only their product they can edit. Okay, so no one can edit others product and delete it. So we're going to safeguard those things in the upcoming code. So long story short, we have used this post method and we're going to make it as an asynchronous. So async task of I action result. Okay, and then we created an object of type product. Now we are going to call the method in the service layer create product and pass in this entity. Once you do this, everything is set. Let's run it and see. You see this, our Swagger is enough, intelligent enough to show what is the input type. So let's try it out. Let's give some name. ID is the property. You don't need to do anything here. It's by default inherited from the product view model. That's why it's coming. You don't need to pass anything. Let it be 0. Even if you pass, it will ignore it. And then pass in all the rest of the properties. Okay, we are not yet validating anything. Simply we have trying to hit with the some sample data. You see this, some information. We got a 400 response, and this is because we already put some restrictions in the data annotation that each property how it should have. Description should be minimum 10 characters, something like that. That's why we got 400 error automatically. Okay, so now everything is correct. We have provided the data. It has come to the data layer, and see, we're executing it. It's saved. And if you see, like I said, you passed 0, right? So like I said, you passed 0, but it came as 1. That is how it is. It will automatically update. So finally we returned, and you got the ID with the 201 status. So for creation, it is preferable to return a 201 status, and if you're returning 200, it's okay, but rest concept wise, it is supposed to be returned 201. We are going to name this HTTP post with a name. You see, that is what I'm doing on line number 44. And to make it a little more beautiful, like it is returning different status codes, right? It can return 400, it can return 201, it can return 401, 403, authentication, authorization, if something goes wrong, which is 500. So let's decorate our method with the produce response type. See, this is from the Swagger inbuilt the DLL. So once you write produce response type and then pass in what is the status code that it is going to produce. So in our case, right, this is 201, right? So post method can create 201. It can also send 400. It can also send 500, right? So all those things, if you decorate here, it will be nice in the Swagger URL, and the documentation will look clear. And one more thing that it can send us, it can send 400, right? So 400 is of type model state dictionary error. So we are saying type of model state dictionary, and then pass in the status code that it is of type 400. There's a small mistake. Let's delete the S. So type of model state dictionary. Now we have 201 configured, we have 400 configured. So what we're going to do is we can actually copy paste this. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this and put it into the other methods also. So we're going to do this declaration for all the methods, and small changes in the respective method. So here this is a get product, and the return type that we will send is a 200. So it's not 201. So 200 okay. And get will of course not have bad request, at least for this get. Okay, so this get will not have bad request, so we will remove it. It's not going to send that, because if there is no data, it will still return an empty array, right? So that's why I removed it from line number 29. So if you remember, line number 32 is directly returning the product from the database entity, right? So we don't want to do that. Like, we created a product view model. So what I'm going to do is in line number 34, I'm going to change this product into the product view model. So for that, you can use product.select. That's the inbuilt method coming from the link queue operation. And I'm saying I want it in product view model type, and I'm basically mapping it, reverse mapping it. Okay, so product list of product is now converted into list of product view model. Okay, so once I do a .to list, it's already converted, and we will pass in the models now. Now, if you see line number 31, it will produce a response of type list of. So this will produce response type of list of product view model, and it will also return a status code 200. Okay, so this is exactly same for the get. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and let's refactor a little more for the ID, so you can delete that part. Okay, so this is good. So this is just one product, so this is just a get product, and it's not list, so it will return a response type of product view model. Now, two get methods has been corrected. We need to copy paste this also, because we need to convert this, right? And because it is just a only one, we're not going to do a dot select and do dot to list. So it's a direct one-to-one mapping. Product is now mapped to product view model. I'm quickly going to do this, and so it's time for the demo. We have set up everything. Let's run the project. It's running. So if you come to the product, right? It now, because of the configuration, the annotation that we did on each API method, it is going to show us here. So it's going to show us what is the return type, what is the return status code for each method. Whatever we configured, it is going to show us nicely. It's a 200, and what is the type of the return statement, all those things. So let's execute one and see what happens, right? So one, did we create any product? Yes. So we got the product back, but it is now translated from our product to the product view model. Okay. And similarly, if you run for the array, it is going to return everything. Now let's stop the project and let's correct wherever we are left out. So what is pending? So if you copy and paste it in the put from the create, right? Put is something that one or more properties of a particular entity will be updated. Okay. So in this case, we will be changing it to the product. So let's correct one by one. So let's rename this to entity to update. And if you see the body, we have to change the body as well, but let's go one by one. So the first thing that we need to do for a product is the product update is we need to go and create an update view model, right? We do have create, so let's go to update folder and create a new class called update product, and that will eventually inherit from the create product. Okay. I'm just making it simple. So create product will eventually inherit the product view model, so everything is like combined, but trust me, wait for the next section of the thing that I'm going to describe. You will understand why we have split like this. Okay. So let's go to this and change this model as update product. Now because you're receiving the product entity itself, whatever we need to update, right? We have updated all these names, available list, everything, and then we will also update another property called modify date. In create, you will update as created date. For update, we will modify the modified date and modified by. Okay. So for now, let's keep it as admin, and all these properties are now ready for update. Now one more thing that we are missing here is the ID property, right? So the product has ID, we need to update that as well, but let's do it. So let's change this method to a async method. So async task of action result, and eventually we will be using an await keyword. So await keyword is also used in line number 115. So all set, and let's name it as update product. All good. Let's copy paste the response type, and here in this case it's 200. Okay, so let's change it to 200. Okay. Okay, so that each method will tell us what it is, right? So input, if you see, we will pass in the ID and name it as update product. Okay, so let's copy this and paste it in the delete statement also. We are going to complete the delete also. So in delete, if you see, it's going to be the same 200. Okay, but in this case, right, if the ID that you're passing, if it is not there, then you will have to return a 404. That's why this one is having a 400 and a 404 as well. Ideally 400 is not required for delete, so we'll remove it, but 404 is status is possible in the delete statement. Okay, so here we will return of type string some messages. Okay, so a type string which is with some message, so 404. Okay, and 404 can be present in put also, because you might pass some ID which is not present, and which is all good. So, and similarly for the get, the single get, if you pass an ID which doesn't exist, then you need to send a 404. See, we updated, so it started showing 200 and 404 in the get statement. All right, so we created it. So let's open up the create one. Let's try one more thing. Let's try it out quickly. I'm going to copy paste some code, some default product. So I copy pasted it, and let's put some description here. Let's give some price, right? $20 maybe, and then we will put this into a first category and execute it. All set, right? So once you execute it, it should return the data. But id1 is the category, right? So category ID, so the category ID, we can create more category IDs here. Let's keep it as toddler toys. So this will return a ID called 5. So let's update that from 1 to 5. Okay, so this particular product that we are creating will be updated into the category 5. So we got created a new product which is of type 2. So let's go to the table and see how it is created. Okay, so let's start from products. See, 2 items got created, and both has different category ID, one with the 2 and one with the 5. All right, so this is good so far, and you see this every time we create, it is creating an admin, under the product owner, we can actually refactor this to have only one admin. We don't need to create every time a single admin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrieve the one of the product that we did, and then I copied everything so that I can explain you how put works. Okay, so let's go and try to click on editing an item. So second number, so the second product is what I'm trying to edit. So I copy paste this. Okay, so everything is good so far. The ID is 2. So I change the price from $20 to $10 and I click on execute. It executed, it was successful. And let's see, let's retrieve all the data and see whether the data is correct. Alright, so we have these products coming up, and looks good so far, right? So the post worked, delete worked. No, delete we haven't seen. The post worked and the update worked. But if you look at the data for the update for the second one that we did, right? We changed from 20 to 10, but we did not see that 10 coming up here. Basically, it did not even update it, looks like, right? So there is something wrong that we are doing. Okay, let's take a look at that, and let's go to delete and see what happens. I'm going to delete the second one. It executed. See, 200 again. If you try to execute the same number, it was already deleted, so you should ideally get 404. Okay, so let's see what happens. We haven't done anything, so let's implement it. Okay, so we were trying something which we haven't done anything. So delete. What you have to do for the delete is, we will first try to see whether that particular ID is present, and if the ID is not present, we will return a 404. So let's make this method also an asynchronous method. So I'm naming it as async method. All good so far. Okay, so let's write a product service dot delete. You see there is a delete method already we have written. So product service dot delete product async and pass in that ID. Okay, so at this point of time, ID whatever you're passing is really a correct ID, because if it was not a correct ID, you would have already written a 404 in line number 131. So let's put a breakpoint and give it a name, I mean a number. The product number is 2, and see, we received the call here, and if you hover on ID, it should give you 2, and let's execute it. It's running. Okay, so the product is not null, which is good. So let's execute it. Delete it. It's going inside that the product delete, and executed it. It's finally deleted it. Okay, so we're returning a OK statement. So we successfully deleted. Let's go to the database and see what we have. So I'm going to execute the product. You see the number 2 item was deleted, right? So if you try to execute again the delete statement on a number which is not present, you should ideally get a 404, and that's what we got it. So far what we saw was all happy flow, right? Now let's take a look at how we can implement custom validation, and I'll show you a scenario. Okay, so let's go back to the product. Okay, I'm going to take a particular product. Okay, just for the demo purpose. So I'm going to retrieve a particular product, and then I'm going to see what it is going to do for the create product. So I copy pasted this, I executed it. Okay, it's the same content of the existing product, whether I do it accidentally or intentionally. Okay, right now there is no validation in place wherein it will check whether a same product do exist or not. Okay, so that is what we are going to avoid now. So if I'm keep executing the same one, duplicate products are created. I don't want any duplicate product to be created, and this is one of the scenario. It could be same thing. You need to validate the incoming the model, and then see if that makes sense to execute or not. Okay, now I'll show you something beautiful. Okay, we are not going to write any validation in the controller layer. Instead, there is another way of doing a validation at the model level. Okay, whatever you are seeing here, they're all data annotation. They're all for basic I would say property level validation, but we don't have any validation in place which goes and talks to database and see whether condition is satisfied or not. So let's create a folder called validation. I'm going to make use of custom interface and an implementation. Okay, let's name it as abstract validatable object. And basically this is an abstract class. Okay, so we're going to make use of validatable object. Okay, so this is an inbuilt interface from C#. You can make use of this interface and implement your logic. So what will happen is when API kicks in with a request, it goes through this flow, and in this flow we can override the method and do our custom validation. That is what we are going to see. Okay, so this abstract validatable object implements validatable object. Okay, so now both becomes an implementable interfaces. Okay, abstract class also is like can have the interface related structure and implementation also. So in this case, what we are going to do, we're going to implement the validate method from. So in this case what we are going to do is we're going to implement the validate method from validatable object. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in some namespace. Cancellation token source is from the system.threading.task. So let's have synchronous and asynchronous method. Okay, so don't worry about all this coding. Keep in mind the concept what we are doing. Okay, so we will have that interface. Let's inherit that into our product view model. See, because you inherited that, it will inherit and create product and update product automatically. That's why these three classes were definitely created in a separate way. You might be wondering why Karthik is doing like this, but that was the reason. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to override that validate async method in this create product. Okay, so what this will basically do is we can have our line by line coding to check certain permissions or certain data against the database and decide whether it is good to go or we should throw them an error. Okay, so let's write so let's have a list of validation result. Okay, and that we will name it as errors. Okay, so the first thing, so this is what product, right? So the first thing that we will do is we are going to check the incoming category ID is valid or not, right? The second one is the product name and so on. So how do we check that? How do we know the ID that you pass in category ID is valid or not? So for that, what we will do is we will create instance of a product service or a category service. Okay, so how do we do that? So in the validation context dot get service, that's an inbuilt di injection method. Okay, here if you ask for product service, then we already configured and configure service, so this is equivalent of injecting the constructor. So this will give us an instance of a product service. Okay, so with the set concept, let's go one by one. Okay, so I'm on the create product. Let's declare a variable called errors of type list of validation errors, validation result. Okay, so the first thing that I want is the category service. Okay, so I'm asking for a category service, and category service we already have it in our project. So once I ask for the service, the DI will give me a service instance for the category, and then we also want the product service. Okay, so line number 17 18 will give us two different servers that we already implemented. Okay, now we have these two things. So what we are going to do now is, so we need to see first the product name do exist in our database or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create is product name exists method in these servers. Okay, so you can also refactor like this. If you don't have anything already there, you can write it there, and if you click on refactor, it will create a method here, and then you can modify. So we are going to modify that as a task of bool instead of just a synchronous boolean method, and which eventually has to go to the repository as well, right? From servers we will touch the repository. So here if you say product repository dot the particular method, so here what we are going to do is we are going to say product repository, and then we need to create a method. So here what we are going to do is we are going to create a method called get product by name, and then pass in a name. Okay, so that's the method that we are going to create, and it's an asynchronous method, so I'll name it as async. Because that method doesn't exist right now, I can actually refactor it, and this has created a method for us. Let's implement that method, and here you see this is how you can refactor and implement it. So here what we need to do is we need to say DbContext.product dot find, or you can use where, you can use many of those classes, the input method, or you can use first or default async. First or default is basically will return a data, or it will return a, a safe null. Okay, so here we will first convert the name into lowercase before we do a comparison, because sometimes it, based on the case sensitivity, it will say this is not exist. So let's compare it with the two lowercase, and here what this will return is it will return a product. Okay, so let's change the signature in the database layer, so it will return a task of product, and if the name exists, and if not, it will return a null. Now if you come back to the servers, we are calling this method, and now here is the place where you need to use async await. Why? At this point of time I wanted to await for the result and see whether the result is null or not. If it is not null, I will return a true. If it is null, it will return a false. So that's why you can use async await whenever you want the data to be verified, or you wanted to process something based on the data. Now let's come back to this validation part. Now this flow is completed. Is product name exist will give us a boolean, a true or false. Let's say it gives a true, which means the incoming new creation of a product, that name do already exist. So we will add an error saying error.add, and we will pass in a new validation result error. Here we will format with a template return called the dollar symbol, and then you can say product with name, whatever name that came in exist. Please provide a different name. So what will happen is we're going to execute and see what happens, but basically this will give us a 400 error to the caller. The caller will come to know that the request has something invalid data, so we need to correct it. 400 error code is meaning you can always correct the data and send it back to the server for processing again. That is what status code 400 means. Okay, this is one of the interview questions they will ask you, so let's put that await keyword there and try to remember whatever I'm saying, and you can always comment if you have any questions. If some particular section is not clear when you're watching this video, please do post, don't forget it. So we validated the product name. We also have to validate whether the incoming category ID do exist or not. So think of this, right? If the category ID doesn't exist, right? So for whatever we tested as a happy flow, we gave a ID which do exist, like, but in a real time if it doesn't exist, it won't even create a product, because it will try to create a product with a foreign key of a category ID, which means a primary key of category ID doesn't exist, right? So it will throw an error. You can try it out. I mean, you will sometimes encounter, if you give some bad data, you will encounter when you're developing this app. But let's stick to the topic. So we have written a similar get category. So here we pass in a category ID and we try to retrieve it, and if it exists, it's all right. If it doesn't exist, we will say, hey, category ID doesn't exist, give us a proper category ID. And we also added a validation where a price cannot be less than 5, right? It can be 5, but it cannot be less than 5. So 3 validations we have added it. Okay, now let's run and see what happens. So let's open up, let's retrieve some data. Okay, so this will retrieve like 4-5 data, right? Whichever we entered. Let's pick up one data. Okay, simply pick up a data, and we are going to check how our validation is going to work. So I copied it, come to the post. You can also put it in put, but let's go to post. We haven't done for the put, right? So let's go to post, let's copy paste it. Okay, we can change this ID to 0, that's fine. Now if you execute, this was copy pasted, so ideally you should get 400 error because the name also exists already. See, the breakpoint has hit here, it did not go to API controller yet. So let's go one by one. All good. See, there is some error, so let's see what is the problem. Category ID, so we got an error and category ID seems to be a null. That's because we did not configure the category in our the configure servers. So let's quickly add up that. So see, these errors I'm showing you because this is very common that you will miss. Okay, Basically what it was complaining us, it was complaining the category services itself is null because it was trying to inject using a dependency injection, but the service was never configured, so we never got that. See, now we got the services back, and now we need to actually rerun it. Okay, so we copied it, we rerun it. Let's execute and see what happens. So I'm opening up the product create. Okay, all good. So let's change that 4 to 0 and let's execute and see. Okay, and here if you see price is less than 4, I'm changing the price is less than 4. Category also I'm putting some category which doesn't exist, so that it comes here, and then we can see all the 3 validations are kicking in. Okay, so the first one, name do exist. See, it was a true, right? Because we did not modify the name, so we added that error. Category also doesn't exist, so we added the error. Price was 4, which is also an error. So 3 errors. Now if you see, we got a 400 error back with the 3 properties saying correct all these 3 things and send it back. So we are saying correct all these errors and send it back, and we should be able to process the request. So that is what the 400 means. Now I corrected all the 3 things. Let's try one more time. Execute one by one. See, it did not go any of these 3 errors. Errors are 0. When the errors are 0, then only it will get into the API controller action method. Okay, this is the right way of doing it. Do not write any validation directly on the controller layer. So the next thing that we will see is updating the update product. Okay, so we're gonna copy paste exact same validation whatever there in the create product, but there's a slight change in this update product. Okay, so in this case also we will have to check the category ID and the price and so on. However, for the product name or the product checking, right, so we need to be changing the logic. So we should check whether a product do exist or not based on the name and the ID. So name should not be same as other product name, however ID should also match with that. Okay, so for that we are changing a new method. I mean, like, we are gonna create a new method which accepts the name and the product ID. So its product exists. So basically what this will do is it will go and try to find a product with that ID. At the same time, the name should not be same as other product. Okay, so when this combination do exists, then we are good for update. If this is not present, basically the name is duplicated when we got an update for a different ID, then we should not be allowing them to do a update operation. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. So you see this, we are checking this information and we are going to return the task of boolean. Okay, so this will tell us the product should not be null. At the same time, the product ID should not be not equal to the product ID. Okay, so line number 51 will give us a true or false based on this condition. Now let's get this same signature in the service layer. We just wrote it in the repository, so let's write it in the signature in the service layer and the repository layer. Okay, so let's do that quickly. So you see this is another one. So get product by name along with the product ID, right? So here what we are doing, whatever I just described you, right, we are doing the same thing. So we are checking the name as well as the product ID. Okay, so product service is almost done. Let's quickly finish this up. So if you see this method is going and calling get product by name by passing name and the product ID. See, this is overloading, right? So same method name, different signature, different parameters. So we just wrote a overloading method, and we should be good for testing. So let's open up this. Let's take one of the product. Okay, and we copy that and put it into the put method, and we're going to test the update product. Okay, so I copied it. Let's go to put, which is the update statement, and then let's copy paste this, and let's also pass in the same ID 4. Okay, all right, so now what I'm going to do, you see this, I'm copying an existing item in a different product and changing this name. If this update happens, which is wrong because same name for two product will happen, So what we are checking here is, we are checking here properly the category IDs are present, the product is do exist or not, right? So once all these things are present, we will send them a appropriate message. See, here we are saying you try to update the name of the product which is exists in a different product, so we will not allow them. So now we corrected it. Okay, so validation works good. Now it is updating us properly, and we got the 200 response. But let's go and see whether it updated or not. Looks it is not updated. If you remember sometime back when we also was testing the put, it did not update. That is because if you see in the put, we have to pass the ID of the product. When we did this copy paste, we missed to update the ID of the product. For create product ID will not be present, it will be 0, but here we are sending 4 in the body, right? But we did not update that in the translation, so that's why it did not update at all. It did not know which entity was tracking. We just returned the 200. Okay, now we did all the changes, it is updating properly. Okay, so let's put a breakpoint, and now if you see this number 3, so I'm executing here, we got the breakpoint hit. So we'll execute one by one and see what happens for this case. Okay, so now here if you see the ID was now updated, right? So we are now passing a product with that ID into our method, and we got the error. Okay, so this error, right, so cannot be tracked because another entity is tracked. So this is one of the common error that you will see from entity framework. See, what this errors mean is, when we are trying to retrieve some particular entity from the database, so the each entity that we try to retrieve will be tracked by the entity framework, as long as we don't as long as we mention that do not track it with a special method called as no tracking, every entity will be tracked. So what went wrong in our case was, during our validation check there was a product call for a particular ID, so it started tracking, and then it is still in the memory for tracking, right? And then we were trying to do an update with the same tracking entity with a different instance, so it was throwing us an error that this is not possible. So how do we solve this? This is all common that you will encounter, but don't panic. This is what it means, right? So you should understand the tracking has to be switched off if you do not want the entity to be tracked. Okay, so we're going to change a couple of logic to make sure this entity is not tracked during the validation. However, we will start tracking it, and then we will update it in a write statement. Okay, so back on the screen. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go to that particular method which was doing a tracking, right? So which is the is product exist async method. So we'll go all the way through repository from the service. So repository is the place where we need to change it. So you see this the product. So if you see this, we need to add a method called as no tracking. So once you specify that as no tracking, we are insisting the entity framework not to track the entity for that particular call. Okay, so the product ID that we were trying to retrieve will not be tracked. Now let's put this as no tracking in most of our repository place where we really don't need to track it, because most of them were like kind of validating. But remember one thing, you should not be putting this in a place where you need tracking, right? Especially during the post update delete, you need tracking of that entity. Now what we are going to do is, let's come back to the the controller. What we will do is, first let's retrieve that particular ID where this is tracked. Okay, so we will earlier what we were doing, we were having two different instances, one was tracked and one was not tracked, and we were trying to update it. So this time line number 107 will retrieve us a product with an ID that we are specifying. Okay, get product async, this is a trackable method, so don't get confused. So what will happen, line number 107 we will retrieve that that particular product ID. Okay, and it will be tracking. So with that tracking instance itself, we will try to modify the properties, because we're trying to modify the properties of that tracking instance itself. Okay, we don't need to create a separate stuff, so we just need to pass in that entity directly, and then we should be good to go. So the project is getting built, so let's try it out for the put statement. So we are on the screen. I'm going to do the same thing, so let's do an edit and put a 3 and copy paste number 3, and then let's do some update. So if you see this the method that we modified, right, will not be tracked, and here this place it will track. So with the tracked entity, there's only one entity tracked right now. We are updating and everything went good. See, it got updated. 200, right? You can actually now go back. I did some changes. We are trying to update, right? It updated. Let's verify that. Okay, so let's run this execute of get all. The product number 3 which we updated, right? It should have got updated, which is done. Alright guys, we are very close to completing the course. So if you see, you have already learned get, put, post, delete with the proper custom validation, and almost all the flows I've been teaching you so far, right? So all good. So in order to complete this project, we have a couple more methods that we need to create. So if you see, one product can have more than one images, right? So next set of thing that we are going to do is uploading the image, saving the content of the image, and we will also modify the existing get to retrieve the image as well. That is the overview of the next 10-15 minutes of your thing. So for this, what we will need similar methods to find out the product image, and then we will be validating the image whether the right file is coming or not, and then we will be saving all those things, right? So if you see on my screen, what I'm doing is there is a method which accepts iForm file is basically accept files. It can accept one or more files, so we will send one by one. See, all these APIs that we are developing, it's exactly used in the upcoming UI video for Angular. So here, let's keep it simple. The name of the method is upload product image. We will upload to an URL API/product/upload/id. ID specifies for which product we are going to upload an image. Okay, right now we are allowing only 4 types of file: JPG, PNG, SVG, and JPEG file. You can always modify and change it to however you want. So it will validate the incoming file extension, and if it is not in the right format, we will send them back a 400 response, which is bad request. Okay, if not, what we are going to do is we are going to read that file stream with the memory stream, and then we will use copy to async file. So if you see, I was talking about async await. So this is one of the other logic. So file is basically having an inbuilt method called copy to async. They're all inbuilt methods. Okay, so that is also an async method. So we are using that method and passing the stream, and then converting that to array and saving it. Okay, and where do we save this? We are actually saving this in the database itself. So if you see product service.create product image async, there is no such method, but we are going to send some information. So we are going to send this couple of information to this method, and which will eventually save our data. Okay, I have already created the methods for our processing. Like, we don't need to watch every single method that I'm creating. I would like to save your time. So the logic is all same. Entity framework logic, flow, everything is same. It's just that we are adding more features to this project. Okay, so we have these things. Once you send this information, it will create the product image, and then the product image ID will be sent. Okay, and it returns a 200. Okay, and this is of type a particular image type. So this is the project image ID. Okay, it will return that particular ID for every single upload. Okay, so let's see what this method is doing. This method is basically accepting a couple of parameters. It is formatting it to a product image entity and passing it to the next repository method. Okay, so here we retry that product, and then we assign that image into this product image. So that's the graph. Okay, so once you do that, entity framework knows how to assign a product ID to that product image table according to how we have graphed. Okay, that's how the entity framework works. And then that's it. It will save, it will generate everything. So let's copy some images and upload it. So let's take a look at the demo. Okay, so I'm going to upload certain files to a particular product. So let's put the product number as 5, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a particular toy item. So I already have the images. So once I choose one image, if I execute, right, it has already uploaded and it has given us a record number, which is 1. Okay, so now if you see this product image, right, the product image is not linked to our product view model. Okay, so we need to make sure we send that product image view model also along with the product, so that it's not that we have to make sure we have to send, but the way I've designed it is like from the UI, when they call a particular product, I will be able to get the product detail as well as the first image of the product. Okay, it might have more images, but that is what we are going to do. So we are going to create a particular product image view model, and also we will have that attribute to the product view model. Okay, so now the product view model was having only product information. So the product view model was having only the product information. What we will do is we have added the product image view model. So let's retrieve that information also and then assign it to the mapping, right, in the get method, so that when you execute get, you will get both product and the product images that is linked to that particular product. And if there is no product image yet, like if nothing was uploaded, obviously it will be a empty array, and which is okay. So how do we get that? So let's create a new method called get product and image async. See, so I would say, as long as one method is doing only one work, which is good. One method should not do many work. Okay, that is one of the solid principle. Okay, so what we are going to do is we will use an include statement for the product, that is also inbuilt entity framework stuff. So once you have include and then assign a product image in this, when it retrieves a particular product, it will retrieve its foreign key related content from another table called product images. So that's what this is doing. One product, but for that product, whatever the product image was uploaded, that table also will be retrieved. That is what dot include will do from the entity framework code. Okay, now you're learning some entity framework as well, along with how you're learning the web API. It is good. So now we know it is a possibility of getting a list of product images. That's why our return statement was list of images. Okay, so let's finish up this iProduct repository. Okay, so here what we will do is get product and image. So we have this, and then the next one is the get products and image async with a particular ID. See here, the difference is the first one will return only one product. Okay, here we will retrieve all the products, and for each product their respective product images also will be returned. Okay, and why do we need this method? If you remember, there are two gets, right? One get is to retrieve only one particular product, and there is another get which retrieves, so there is another get that retrieves a lot of product, and the number of product you can send, right? So when we send, we want 100 product, we were trying to retrieve those 100 products. Okay, so that is what we are doing. All right, so all good so far. Okay, so we have refactored some code to support with the existing method itself, which will retrieve the product as well as the product image. Okay, now we should not forget to do as no tracking. Okay, so let's put that for all the get methods later things. So as no tracking is little included, and which is good to use. And if you see, what I'm doing is I'm trying to refactor the existing code, okay, where only the product was pulled, right? Instead, I'm pulling the product image also. Okay, see, I'm trying to refactor. As and when you start learning and do more work, wherever it is possible, it is good to refactor and keep it simple. So here it is straightforward. We are just including the logic to retrieve the product image table data as well. Okay, so that is what we are doing. Okay, so let's wrap it up quickly. So all these things are good. So in the repository, we are currently making the changes so that none of the existing thing will get affected. So we also have as no tracking mechanism, which is good. Okay, so let's come to the service and let's finish up the rest of the method that we just created, right? So we need to finish up that in the iProduct service. Okay, that will support the product image retrieval also. All right, so let's finish it up. So line number 84 is basically we are going to call the repository method which returns product and the product image. Okay, so that is what we are doing, and all these things are asynchronous. If you see from the starting till now, I'm using most of them are asynchronous coding. I'm used to that, and it is easy and good to use it. It will be very fast, and the more users comes in a real time, it will be really fast. It will be in milliseconds to retrieve the data. Okay, and so what is pending? So we are coming back to the final get method, right? So the get method that we already have it in the product controller. So here already we have retrieved only product related information, right? So here if you see, we are retrieving now product image view model also. So here if you remember, the data that you are retrieving from line number 58 returns product. So line number 58 returns product and their respective product images. So what we are checking on line number 71 is if that particular product has any product images. Okay, is dot any is basically will return true or false. If it has, Then we are doing product image dot select, and we are formatting it to a product image view model. And if we don't have anything, we will simply return an empty array. Okay, so if it doesn't have, we're going to return the empty array. Okay, that's what the colon, the ternary operator, does. Okay, all right, so this is all good. Let's format. Control A, Control K, Control F will format the code. Okay, Control A will select all the codes, and then Control KF will format the code. So all these things are like shortcuts, as in when we go through, I'll let you know a few things. And if you want to bring up the namespace, you can just say control period will give you some options of what namespace are available if there is a method, you know, that you're writing and you don't know what is that namespace. Okay, good. So all good. So right now we are on the list. I think we are on the list of product view models, right? It's a second get where we retrieve many products. So here the logic is same, right? We are going to use a particular method which returns both product and their product images, and rest of the logic is all same. So we will also send the product image view model if there is a view model for each product. If not, we will send a empty array. So let's run the project and execute and see what is the response that we get. So let's go back to a particular product ID. We already created some products, so let's put 1. So we have put 1 and we have executed it. So here you should receive the response that was showing up here, right? It should give us the property of the product as well as the image, and if there is no image, obviously it will be empty array. So let's put number 5, which we uploaded one image, right? See, now the image is translated into this base64 content. The reason why I'm sending this base64 content is you can actually see how I'm doing it in the UI for the Angular shopping cart project. Will be published shortly. So this can be actually translated into an image. Okay, so all good. So now I would like to save some time of yours. So what we have covered so far is the category controller and the product controller. Product controller has product image stuff as well, right? So we covered both of things, and you saw from top to the bottom, starting from the API layer, touching the custom validation, and then service layer, data part, repository pattern, everything you saw. We were able to cover most of the required APIs for this project, right? So the one thing which is left is the wishlist controller. Wishlist controller is basically which will have a couple of methods. So that method, what it will do is it will get the wish list of a particular person. So it will get a particular list of wish products a person has preferred it from the UI, right, or from the API, and it will also save and update it. So all those things are already written. This is exactly similar to what we have done so far, so let's not waste time. Instead, I've already given you the complete code. You can go and use it, or you can check, and if you have any questions, you can let me know. I will be happy to clarify your questions. All good. So having said this, we have come to the conclusion of this course. Now I believe you would have learned something new and a proper way of implementing. So this is like kind of a corporate level implementation, but I have not gone a little more deeper because I want this to be understood by everyone. Like I would like the beginner to the intermediate person, or more than that, I wanted them to understand this. So that's why I covered most of the topics and not too deep inside each and every nook and corner of the cases. But in the next course we will cover more. So if you like my video, if you like this course, please give me a thumbs up, provide your comments in the comment section. All your comments are valuable for me. I will always try to improve and fulfill the gaps that I have anything on the videos. So let's do that, and I hope you enjoyed this course and you learned many things from this course. Thank you, and I will see you in the next video for the authentication and authorization for the API and the UI. And don't forget to subscribe my channel, and also there will be a new video for the Angular full course based out of these APIs, so don't forget to see that video as well. Thank you guys, see you soon. Thanks for watching. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe my channel, like it, share it, comment it, and never forget to click on the bell icon.